Jason Statham stood in the doorway of his dimly lit home, gripping the phone so tightly it creaked in his hand. His pulse was steady, too steady. That old, deadly calm he hadn't felt in years was creeping back, drowning out everything but a singular focus: find her. The TV was still on in the background. A half-eaten dinner sat on the coffee table. Just moments ago, life had been simple. Normal. Now, Jason took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. His hands moved on their own instinct. He grabbed his jacket, slipped a knife into his boot, and tucked a pistol into the waistband of his jeans. His daughter, Emma, was only 12. Sweet, stubborn, and too much like him for her own good. And now, she was hurt. Taken. Jason wasn't the type to pray, but for the men responsible, he hoped they had. Because what was coming for them wasn't mercy. The address came through in a second text from Emma's friend: back alley behind Bennett's bar. 2 cops. Dark SUV. Hurry. Jason moved like a shadow, slipping through the streets unnoticed. He hadn't done this in a long time, but his body still remembered. Muscle memory. Predator's instincts. Bennett's bar was a dive, one of those places where dirty cops and desperate criminals did business over cheap whiskey. Jason had been avoiding places like this for years. Tonight, he was stepping right back into the world he swore he left behind. He spotted the SUV first. Blacked out windows. Still running. A bad sign. And then, a figure on the ground. Small. Unmoving. Jason's world tunneled. He didn't feel his feet hit the pavement. 1 second, he was at the end of the alley. The next, he was kneeling beside Emma. Her lip was split. Blood on her temple. She was breathing, but barely. Rage. Cold, suffocating rage filled Jason's veins. A voice behind him. Hey, what the fuck? Jason moved. The first cop never saw him coming. Jason's elbow crashed into the man's temple, knocking him out before his gun even cleared the holster. The second officer, bigger, slower, managed to pull his weapon. Too late. Jason caught his wrist, twisted. A sickening crack. A scream. The gun hit the ground. Jason didn't stop. He drove a fist into the cop's throat, silencing him instantly. The fight was over in seconds. They were alive. He made sure of it. Not out of mercy, but because he needed answers. He grabbed the conscious one by the collar, dragged him up against the brick wall. The man wheezed, struggling to breathe. Jason's voice was ice. Who sent you? The cop's eyes darted wildly. He was scared, but not of Jason. Why, you don't get it, he gasped. It's bigger than you. You shouldn't have come back. Jason leaned in, his grip tightening. Then they shouldn't have touched my daughter. The cop's breath came in ragged gasps. Blood dripped from his split lip onto his uniform. His partner was still out cold on the ground. Jason didn't blink. His fingers tightened around the man's collar, pressing him harder against the brick wall. You have 3 seconds. The cop spat on the ground, defiance flickering in his swollen eye. Go to hell. Jason exhaled through his nose. Wrong answer. With a practiced twist, he flipped the cop onto the wet pavement and drove his knee into his chest. The man wheezed, his body convulsing in shock. Jason grabbed his broken wrist and twisted, just enough to make pain flash through his body like a lightning strike. The cop howled. Who sent you? His resistance crumbled. Lieutenant Graves, he choked out. Orders came from him. Jason filed the name away. Why? The cop hesitated. Jason twisted again. The scream was instant. I don't know. I swear. We were told to scare her, send a message. Jason's stomach turned to stone. A message. Someone knew who he was. Someone wanted to remind him that no matter how much he tried to disappear, the past never really let go. His gaze dropped to Emma. She was still unconscious, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He clenched his jaw so hard it ached. This wasn't over. Jason reached into the cop's vest and pulled out his police badge. Officer Bradley Kent. A dirty cop, through and through. I want Graves' location. Kent groaned, shaking his head weakly. Man, you don't know what you're stepping into. Jason grabbed the back of his head and slammed it against the pavement. Not hard enough to kill, just hard enough to make him wish he was dead. Kent coughed violently. All right. Christ. He runs things out of a warehouse down on Pier 17. Old shipping yard. You go there, you're walking into a death trap. Jason stood up. Not for me. Kent groaned, rolling onto his side. You don't get it, Statham. This isn't just cops. It's bigger. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. Jason tucked the badge into his pocket and looked down at him. Good. Then he turned back to Emma. He knelt, gently brushing a strand of hair from her bruised face. His heart clenched. She needed a hospital. But hospitals had reports. Reports led to questions. And right now, Jason needed ghosts, not questions. So he picked her up carefully, cradling her against his chest. She whimpered but didn't wake. He glanced once more at the two cops on the ground. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Jason walked out of the alley, his daughter in his arms, and a storm brewing in his chest. Tonight, he'd get her safe. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, he'd start a war. The drive home was silent. Jason kept one hand on the wheel, the other steadying Emma's head against his chest as she slept in the passenger seat. Bruised. Broken. Every mile that passed only fed the fire inside him. Pier 17. Lieutenant Graves. Jason repeated the name in his head like a mantra. He pulled into the driveway of their small house, a simple, quiet place on the outskirts of the city. The kind of home where he thought they'd be safe. He was wrong. Carefully, he carried Emma inside, laid her down on the couch, and grabbed the first aid kit. He cleaned her wounds with hands that had done much worse in another life. She stirred but didn't wake. Good. Jason took a long, slow breath. His heart was a steady drum, his mind already building a plan. Step 1, get information. Graves was a name. But Jason needed to know who was pulling his strings. The police? The mob? A government suit he crossed years ago? One thing was clear, they didn't expect him to fight back. He grabbed his phone, scrolled through a list of contacts he hadn't touched in years. Most of them were dead or disappeared. But one name stood out. Frank Calder. An ex-cop. Ex-gangster. And the only man Jason knew who had a foot in both worlds. Jason dialed. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then. Jason? The voice on the other end was wary. Like hearing a ghost. I need information. A pause. Then a sigh. Jesus. How bad is it? Jason glanced at Emma, her small hand curled into a fist even in sleep. His jaw tightened. Bad. Another pause. Then Calder muttered a curse. Meet me at the old boxing gym. 1 hour. Jason hung up. Boxing gym, 11:23 p.m. The gym was dark, abandoned for years. Jason stepped through the broken doorway, the smell of sweat and rust still lingering in the air. A single light flickered near the back. Frank Calder stood there, older, thicker, but just as sharp. He wore a wrinkled suit and a tired expression. You look like hell, Frank muttered. Jason ignored the small talk. Lieutenant Graves. Tell me everything. Frank sighed, rubbing his face. Man, you really don't pick easy fights. Who does he work for? Frank hesitated. Then, finally, he spoke. Victor Langley. The name hit like a gunshot. Jason's blood turned to ice. Langley was supposed to be dead. A ruthless Black Ops handler from Jason's past. The kind of man who never got his hands dirty, but made sure everyone else's were covered in blood. If he was behind this, then this wasn't about dirty cops. This was personal. Jason clenched his fists. No more warnings. No more second chances. They came after his daughter. Jason didn't waste time. If Victor Langley was involved, this wasn't just about corruption. It was a message. And Jason Statham wasn't the kind of man to ignore a message. Frank Calder lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Listen, Jason, you go after Langley, you're digging up a grave that should have stayed buried. The guy's not just connected, he's got the police, the feds, and the kind of people who don't ask questions when bodies disappear. Jason's expression didn't change. Where is he? Frank exhaled smoke, shaking his head. You don't get it. He doesn't work in the open. He's a ghost. Jason stepped closer. So am I. Frank held his gaze for a moment, then sighed in defeat. All right. I know where Graves is tonight. Langley's puppet. If you rattle his cage, he'll lead you to the big man. Jason already knew where this was going. Frank glanced around, lowering his voice. Graves is at a high-roller poker game. Backroom of the Orion Club. Cops, criminals, politicians, it's where the real business happens. Jason nodded. Then that's where I start. The Orion Club, 12:57 a.m. The Orion was the kind of place that screamed money and filth in equal measure. Red velvet booths, overpriced drinks, and security thicker than a presidential motorcade. Jason walked in slow, controlled. The bouncer at the entrance barely glanced at him, he had the look of a man who belonged. Inside, the real action was in the back. A VIP section guarded by two muscle-bound goons in suits. Jason counted their holsters. Right side. Heavy calibers. Slow draw. Easy. He moved toward the bar, scanning the room. Then, he spotted Lieutenant Graves. The cop was laughing, whiskey in hand, surrounded by smug, corrupt men who thought they were untouchable. Jason's hands clenched. They put their hands on Emma. They were about to learn what that cost. Jason turned to the bartender. Whiskey. Neat. The bartender poured the drink. Jason didn't touch it. Instead, he reached into his jacket, just enough movement to get the attention of one of the guards at the back. The man stiffened, stepping closer. Jason waited. The second the guard leaned in, Jason moved. A sharp twist, elbow to the throat. A knee drove into the ribs. Jason caught the man's gun as he crumpled, turning it on the second guard. 2 shots. Silencer on. Clean. No screams. Just bodies hitting the ground. The room froze. Graves' laughter died in his throat. He turned, face draining of color. Jason stepped forward, gun still smoking. Let's talk. The other men at the table shot up, hands reaching for weapons. Jason didn't blink. I wouldn't. Silence. A cold, stretched out moment. Graves swallowed hard. You don't know what you're doing. Jason's voice was ice. I know exactly what I'm doing. And if you don't want to die right here, you're going to tell me where Langley is. Graves hesitated. Jason shot him in the knee. The cop screamed, collapsing as the entire club erupted in chaos. Jason grabbed him by the collar, dragging him toward the exit as the other guests scrambled out of the way. Blood soaked into Graves' pant leg. He gasped in pain. All right. All right. Stop! Jason didn't. He kept walking, dragging the man toward the alley outside, where the night air was thick and cold. He threw him against the brick wall. Graves groaned, clutching his shattered knee. "You're a dead man, Statham." Jason crouched. Langley. Graves' breathing was ragged. "Warehouse. Pier 17. He's there tonight. But you're walking into a goddamn slaughterhouse." Jason's stare was unwavering. "Not for me." He raised the gun. Graves' eyes widened. Wait. Jason pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the alley. He didn't stay to watch the body hit the ground. Pier 17 was waiting. And Jason was ready for war. Jason parked a block away. The warehouse loomed in the distance, surrounded by rusted shipping containers and dim security lights. He had been here before. Not this exact spot, but places like it. Kill zones. One way in. No way out. A trap. Jason didn't care. They hurt his daughter. They thought he would be afraid. That he would run. They forgot who he was. Jason moved through the shadows, keeping low. 6 armed men outside. Cheap muscle. Not trained. Not ready for him. He slipped behind the first one, knife to throat. A quick slice, and the man slumped silently. One down. Jason caught another near the fence. A hard strike to the temple, then a twist, neck snapped. 2 down. The third heard something and turned, too slow. Jason silenced pistol coughed twice. 3 down. The others weren't a threat. Not to him. They died before they even saw him coming. 6 bodies. No alarms. No noise. Jason was inside. 1:55 a.m., the kill box. The warehouse smelled of oil and rust. A single hanging light buzzed in the center. Jason stepped forward, silent, every nerve in his body ready. Then, clank. The doors slammed shut behind him. A voice echoed from the darkness. Well. The ghost returns. Jason turned slowly. Victor Langley. He stepped out of the shadows, dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair slicked back. Behind him, 10 men with rifles. Jason exhaled. Not enough. Langley smirked. You should have stayed dead. Jason rolled his shoulders. You should have never touched my daughter. Langley sighed, almost disappointed. I warned them. I said, don't wake him up. Leave him alone. But no, they wanted to send a message. Jason's fists clenched. You failed. Langley nodded. Looks that way. Then he waved his hand. The men raised their rifles. Jason moved first. A gunshot. Jason dove left, rolled behind a crate. Bullets shredded the air where he had been a second before. He drew his pistol, 3 quick shots. 2 men dropped. He kept moving, grabbed a fallen rifle. Automatic fire tore through the warehouse. Jason was a ghost, slipping between shadows, taking them apart one by one. A knife through the ribs. A gunshot under the chin. Silent. Fast. Brutal. 5 down. The last man tried to run. Jason shot him in the back. That left Langley. The old spymaster wasn't smiling anymore. Langley raised his hands, stepping back. All right, he muttered. Maybe I underestimated you. Jason stared at him. You did. Langley exhaled, then chuckled. You can kill me. Won't change anything. The world's still rotten. Someone else will take my place. Jason nodded. Then he shot him in the gut. Langley gasped, collapsing onto his knees. Blood pooled beneath him. Jason crouched beside him. You're right. Langley coughed, pain twisting his face. Then why? Jason fired again. Between the eyes. No more words. No more threats. It was over. Jason stepped out of the warehouse, gun still warm in his hand. The bodies behind him didn't matter. Only one thing did. Emma. He pulled out his phone, dialing Frank. The old cop picked up after 2 rings. "It's done," Jason said. Frank was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "Jesus. What now?" Jason looked up at the night sky. "Now he goes home." The night was quiet. Too quiet. Jason pulled into the driveway, hands still tight around the wheel. Blood stained his knuckles, not his. The scent of gunpowder clung to his clothes. He took a slow breath. Exhaled. Emma was inside. Safe. That was all that mattered. But he wasn't. Jason stepped out of the car, scanning the street. No movement. No cars parked where they shouldn't be. For now, it was clear. He walked up to the front door, unlocked it, and slipped inside. The house was dark, except for the soft glow from the living room. He saw her immediately. Emma was curled up on the couch, a blanket draped over her small frame. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table. Her breathing was slow, steady. Jason swallowed hard. He had seen men die with less damage than she had taken. But she was tough. Strong. Just like her mother. He stepped closer, careful not to wake her. He could still see the faint bruises on her face, the cut on her lip. His jaw clenched. The rage was still there. Emma stirred. "Dad?" Jason knelt beside the couch as her eyes fluttered open. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm here." Her small hand reached for his, gripping it weakly. "Did you?" Jason nodded. It was over. Emma closed her eyes again, sighing softly. "Good." Jason sat there for a long time, holding her hand, listening to the sound of her breathing. She was safe. That was all that mattered. But deep inside, Jason knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Jason sat at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey in front of him. He hadn't touched it. The phone rang. He let it ring 3 times before answering. A familiar voice spoke. Frank called her. "You should leave town," Frank said. No greeting, no hesitation. "Now. Tonight." Jason rubbed his temple. "It's done, Frank." A pause. Then, "No, it's not." Jason sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" Frank exhaled. "I pulled some strings, looked deeper. Langley wasn't acting alone. He had someone backing him. Someone big." Jason's grip tightened around the phone. "Who?" Frank hesitated. Then, "His name is Elias Voss." Silence. Jason closed his eyes. He knew that name. Voss wasn't a cop. He was something worse. A billionaire. A power broker. A man who owned cities, governments, and people. And if Langley was working for him, Emma was never safe. Jason exhaled slowly. "Where is he?" Frank hesitated. "Jason. Where is he?" Frank sighed. "He's in London." Jason leaned back in his chair. His fingers drummed against the table. For a moment, he considered walking away. He could take Emma, disappear. Go somewhere no one would find them. But he knew better. Men like Voss didn't stop. Jason had to end this. Jason stood in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep. He had one job in this world, to protect her. And there was only one way to do that. No more running. Jason walked to the closet, pulled out a black duffel bag. Inside, a passport, a gun, and a one-way ticket to London. The ghost wasn't done yet. The rain hit hard, drumming against the rooftops of the city. Jason stepped out of the black cab, his hood pulled low over his face. He had been here before, years ago, when his work was different, when he was a weapon, not a father. Now he was something else. He moved through the crowded streets, slipping between tourists and late-night drunks. No luggage. No traceable phone. No past. Just a name. Elias Voss. And a promise. This ends tonight. Frank had set him up with a place. Small, tucked into an alley near the Thames. The kind of apartment that had seen more criminals than tourists. Jason locked the door behind him and dropped his bag on the table. A burner phone sat waiting. He flipped it open, dialing the only number saved inside. Frank picked up on the second ring. "You're in." Jason unzipped the bag, pulling out a suppressed pistol and extra magazines. "Tell me what I need to know." Frank sighed. "Voss isn't just powerful, he's untouchable. Owns politicians, police, even military contracts. But more than that?" Jason loaded the pistol. "What?" "He's careful. Paranoid. Doesn't trust anyone." Jason smirked. That made two of them. Frank continued, voice tense. "He's hosting a private gathering tomorrow. Big money. Private security. The kind of place you don't walk into unless you're invited." Jason zipped up his jacket. "Then I'll have to get creative." Jason didn't sleep. Instead, he followed a name, one of Voss's lieutenants, a fixer named Marcus Hale. Hale ran security for Voss. He knew how to get in. Jason found him in a high-end lounge, drinking alone. A man who thought he was safe. Jason slid into the seat across from him. Hale blinked. "Who the hell are?" Jason grabbed his wrist under the table. "Tight. Crushing. Don't talk. Just listen." Hale swallowed hard. Jason leaned in. "You work for Voss?" Hale didn't answer. Jason tightened his grip. The man winced. "You're going to tell me how to get into that party tomorrow?" Hale's eyes darted around, looking for an exit. Jason's free hand tapped his pistol under the table. Hale's breath hitched. You can't. It's impossible." Jason tilted his head. "Nothing's impossible." Hale licked his lips. "It's underground. A private bunker beneath the Brighton Club. High security, biometric scanners, armed guards." Jason's stare was stone cold. "And how do you get in?" Hale hesitated. Jason pulled a knife from his sleeve and pressed it lightly against his ribs. "Marcus. Don't make me ask twice." The fixer's face went pale. "There's a staff entrance in the alley. No scanners. Just a code." Jason smiled. "That's better." Hale exhaled shakily. "Jesus. Look, I don't know what your problem with Voss is, but you don't want to go after him." Jason leaned in, voice like steel. "I don't want to. I have to." He slid out of the booth, dropping some cash on the table. "A final warning. Leave town, Marcus. If I see you again, I won't be this polite." Hale nodded quickly. Jason walked out into the night, his next move already set. Tomorrow, he was walking into Voss's fortress. And he wasn't leaving until it was finished. The Brighton Club, 11:45 p.m. London's elite gathered beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, their laughter and conversation a mask for the corruption beneath. The underground bunker was a fortress, guards at every entrance, cameras covering every angle, and a single rule: if you weren't invited, you didn't belong. Jason Statham didn't belong. He adjusted the stolen security uniform, moving through the staff entrance Hale had given him. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He wasn't here to play games. He was here to end this. The bunker was carved from reinforced steel, designed to withstand anything short of a nuclear strike. Armed men patrolled the halls, each one bought and paid for by Elias Voss. Jason moved like a shadow, his steps silent. His stolen ID got him past the first checkpoint. Step 1, get inside. Done. Now, find Voss. Jason slipped into the staff hallway, moving past waiters and bartenders who had no idea Death had just walked in. Then, a voice in his earpiece. Frank. Security's shifting. They know something's off. Jason's jaw tightened. How long do I have? 10 minutes. Maybe less. More than enough. He stepped into an elevator, swiped the stolen keycard, and pressed B3. Voss would be waiting. The doors slid open. Jason stepped into a vast private lounge, its walls lined with bookshelves, fine art, and priceless sculptures. A man like Voss didn't just own power, he collected it. At the center of the room, sitting behind a glass desk, was Elias Voss. The man barely looked up, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was older than Jason remembered, gray at the temples, but still sharp, still calculating. I was wondering when you'd show. Voss took a sip of his drink. You're predictable, Jason. That's why you've already lost. Jason stepped forward, gun drawn. You talk too much. Voss smirked. And you don't talk enough. Then, gunfire. Jason spun, dropping behind a marble statue as bullets ripped through the air. 3 guards. Heavy armor, trained killers. Jason moved fast. 2 shots, one in the throat, one in the chest. One down. A second guard charged. Jason sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and broke it with a brutal snap. The man screamed. Jason silenced him with a bullet to the head. 2 down. The last one hesitated. Jason didn't. He closed the distance, grabbed the man's rifle, and drove his elbow into his skull. The body dropped. 3 down. Voss hadn't moved. Jason leveled his gun. No more games. Voss sighed, setting his glass down. You still don't get it, do you? Jason's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Voss smiled. I own this city. Jason heard it before he saw it, a countdown timer. His eyes flicked to the side. A small device on Voss's desk. 0:05. 0:04. 0:03. Jason lunged. 0:02. 0:01. The blast tore through the room. Jason hit the ground hard, ears ringing, smoke and fire swallowing everything. His vision blurred. Blood dripped down his face. Through the chaos, Voss was gone. Jason pushed himself up, coughing. No. He wouldn't let this end like that. Not after everything. He forced himself forward, through the wreckage, out of the burning office. Then, a glimpse. Voss, limping toward an emergency exit. Jason ran. They burst onto the rooftop. Rain poured from the sky, washing away the blood and smoke. Voss turned, a gun in his hand. You just don't stop, do you? Jason stepped forward. Not until you're dead. Voss smirked. You're a relic, Jason. A man who thinks justice still matters. But the world doesn't work like that. Jason didn't respond. He just raised his gun. Voss laughed. You really think killing me changes anything? There's always another me. Someone richer, smarter, more powerful. Jason pulled the trigger. 1 shot. Voss staggered back, clutching his chest. He gasped, blood trickling from his lips. You can't. Jason stepped closer, grabbed him by the collar, and whispered. You were wrong. Then he threw Voss off the roof. The body disappeared into the darkness below. Jason watched for a second. Then he turned and walked away. It was over. Jason pulled out his phone. One number. One voice that mattered. Emma. She answered, half asleep. Dad? Jason closed his eyes. Hey, sweetheart. Everything's okay. A pause. Then a soft sigh. Are you coming home? Jason looked out over the city. The rain, the lights, the life still moving on. He smiled. Yeah, kid. I'm coming home.